Okay, so part 3 in this series, non-parallel vertical ribs in the bow form here. And for this one, I'm going to start, as you can see, I've kind of already drawn in this center spine down the middle. And the points are just referring to, here I'm just using the locations of where the isocurves intersect. You might have a different version of that. It depends on, again, how you're spacing out and what dimensions you need for your structure. So it's kind of up to you. In this case, I just put a little point where they hit the isocurves as an example. I'm going to turn this off because what we're going to do is use this planar curve here and the points against it to draw a series of perpendicular lines off of that curve. And we're going to use those then to extrude some planes that we're going to use to cut in our sections into the surface. Okay, so let's go about that. And this, in case you haven't watched the Crystal Bridges tutorial yet, this will kind of give you a light crash course on drawing lines perpendicular to a curve. And we may need to use our multiple views for this. Not that one, but probably our side view here, the front view. So I'm going to kind of work between these two views. Alright, so I'm just going to hold down the line button here. And, well, yeah, you can also just type in line. I suppose that's another way to do it. You're going to see that there's a few options up here in the command line. Perpendicular is the one that we're going to want to use for this. Okay, so the start of the line is going to be anywhere along this curve. We'll just go ahead with the end point. And now it's going to ask for a direction. And you can see in the front view how I'm kind of sliding it around, and you see how it's changing its direction. And that's automatically figuring out on the fly what the perpendicular direction to the curve in that view is, in the kind of planar view. The reason why that's working is that I have this little button down here, planar, turned on. If you have that off, take a look at what's going to happen in the top view. It looks good in the front view, but actually what it's doing is snapping to the C-plane of the front view, basically all the way back to the 0 axis, the X0 axis, and that's not going to work for us. We want to draw this thing directly above, perpendicular to the curve itself. So you have to make sure you got planar on. That'll keep that point within plane, kind of a vertical plane of where it was selected. Okay, so that's super important. The other thing to pay attention to here is up at the top is this from first point option, and you can activate that by just typing in F and hitting enter. So if I do that, it'll snap it to the point from which it started, and now I'm kind of locked into that position. Now it actually doesn't really matter. Even with planar turned off, it'll still work. So it kind of depends on how you're working with the command, but I like to make sure that I use the planar option down here anyway, because it's more often than not the right way to go. Now I'm just going to go ahead and click somewhere off, somewhere over here. It can be of arbitrary length for now. Now we got to do this for each one of the points. All right, so line, perpendicular, snap to a point, F, enter, click off somewhere. All right, you have to repeat that each time. Perpendicular, point, from first, perpendicular, point, F, enter, boom. And we can just kind of work through it. All right. You can probably also activate the command, hit P, enter, click, F, enter. Yeah, it might be a little bit faster, depending on how you like to work. Okay, almost there. The end one we probably don't need, but I'll throw it in there anyway. Okay. So we got a bunch of construction lines that are going to help us place in the right direction our intersecting planes so that we can cut up the surface and create these basically non-parallel sections. All right. Let's turn this on. That'll give us a sense for what that looks like. Yeah. I'm not going to use these edge ones. Just for the sake of this exercise, doesn't seem Well, you know what? Okay, maybe I will. They do actually. They actually might work. Okay, so next step. Extruding out the cutting planes. Okay, so let's just type in extruded curve. We can probably select all these. As a matter of fact, do it all at once because we're extruding all these in the same direction, which would be the Y direction. And hopefully by default, Ryan will select that for you, that Y direction. I've got both sides turned on here, so that's on yes. Just going to change the layer so that they're easier to see. And make sure that they go. One thing that we did forget to do. Hang on one second here. I'm going to click this and then show you something. If we add thickness to this surface, we're going to have a bit of a problem. So let's say we added thickness in the outward direction. These planes aren't going to interact. They're not going to cut all the way through. All right. So one thing that I would suggest you do is extend these blue lines down past through that curve a little further. So just type in extend and then hit enter again without clicking anything, and then just kind of click the line that you want to extend and just click off somewhere, and then you can basically do that. And here I'm just clicking and then hitting enter because it'll remember the distance that I extended the last one in. This is probably overkill, but it illustrates the idea that no matter what you do now, you'll be intersecting with that surface. So if we do add thickness, which might be a good call here, because it'll be easier to offset the rib so that it has some dimension to it. Yeah, we're going to need to extend that. So let's go ahead and start this process now. Let's go back into that layer, and then we're going to offset this surface like we did before. I'll select both of these and join them. Offset this surface outward, so I'm going to make sure they're flipped. Distance 1, fine. Solid, yes, sure, and then go ahead and let that run. Okay, that looks good. And now we want to select our blue layer, so just go ahead and select layer 3, making sure we're deselecting stuff along the way there. Okay, cool. Oops. And then extrude curve. All right. Make sure they're wide enough to fully, cut through the entire form. Okay, so now what we need to do is just run the intersection. So I'm going to go to my red layer. I'm going to select the poly surface for the boat, select all the planes, run the intersect command to find my sections. Take a look at something that we did not do right. Our lines, the blue lines that we drew, were not long enough to clear the top of the boat. And this is one of the problems of me not being too careful with having my layers off while I was doing that, so that will just need to be redone. So what we can do here is just go to that view. Now we can just extend these blue lines to make sure that they actually go far enough. Okay. Okay, that should work now. Kind of ugly, but it'll work. All right, so let's select our layer. I'm just going to do that again. Extrude curve. I guess I'll leave them on the blue layer this time. It doesn't really matter. Okay, that ought to do it. Cutting through everything in the right direction. Turn on my red layer. Run intersect. So first we want to, basically you're selecting everything you're intersecting, so we can just do all that. Let that run and off we go. Just going to join. The planes now, you might want to put these on a separate layer so you can turn them off. I'm just gonna hide those. But it's good to keep stuff, keep your construction layers, intact. All right, and there's our sections. I'm gonna hide that as well to get a look at it. That's pretty nice. Non-parallel sections. These are all joined profiles. Now to extrude these, to give them thickness, we have to, we can do a couple things. Remember the lessons from the first video. We can either extrude one direction or we can extrude both sides. I'm going to go with the both sides approach because I'm going to rebuild the surface anyhow. But now we have to do this one at a time because Rhino, if we do it one at a time, Rhino should, by default, read what the potential perpendicular direction is for each one of these, and it should extrude them in the right direction. So let's make sure that's true first. So let's extrude curve. And it looks like, yeah, by default, it's coming off perpendicular to the plane of the curve, which is pretty great. And this works for planar curves only. Both sides, yes. The extrusion distance, once again, be 0.25 in my case. And then I'm going to just do this one at a time. If you don't do it one at a time, it won't know which direction to select, basically, because these are in different directions, right? Remember, they're non-parallel. And all I'm doing is just reselecting a new curve, running the command again, hitting enter, because it'll repeat the same data that you put into it before. All right, very nice. So let's select those polys. And cap them. Okay, these look pretty good. And let's take a look at how that interacts with our, that's right, I got rid of it. So we got to build a new skin surface, and we can do the same thing that we did previously, right? Remember what we did back over here, where we just basically duplicated out the edges that the skin will touch, and then rebuilt those surfaces nice and clean. Same thing can happen here. I'm going to go ahead and go with it and get started on it. I'm going to start the process, and then I'm going to pause so that the video doesn't get too long. You've seen it before, but just as a reminder, this is the way, I mean, you might actually find a better way to do this, maybe something a little easier, more efficient, whatever works for your project, but this is the way I've been going about it. And I also acknowledge that this changes the surface that we initially had. So, you know, if you're bringing in, if you want the surface to be exactly as it was, make sure you keep a reference of it, right? So you can make sure that you're remodeling those end caps, especially, exactly the right way. But yeah, so it's a bit of a back and forth. You know, we model the form first, develop the sections, build the sections, add the thicknesses, and then it's possible that because of the way that, you know, because of tolerances and because of dimensional kind of overlapping, you need to rebuild, you know, the skin. That sometimes is the case. This one's a little bit hard to tell which one I need, so I'm going to look at the top view, and I have to assume that, yeah, we'll take a look. I still don't know if it's going to be the inner one or the outer one. We'll try the outer ones. And if there's any overlap, we can either reverse that, or we can do a slight offset, a very minor offset, to avoid it. So it's a little bit of trial and error. All right. Good. Okay. Just going to throw a midpoint on this because it's, in this case, because I have some that are half and some that are whole, it's easier to work in half because I can rebuild them all exactly the same way. Remember that when you rebuild, we're going to use the same number of control points afterwards. So if you've got a line that's twice the length, you know, it will rebuild differently. We don't want that. Okay. Should be fine. Deviation's good. Alright, let's see how this goes. I guess I didn't need to pause the video. That went a little faster than I thought it was going to go. Okay, we'll turn this back on. Let's see where we're at here. Do we have any overlap, intersecting? Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. So But that's the solution's not going to be to use that curve. Really what we have is just the kind of loft not being able to fully, fully wrap those two there, and that's not surprising given the fact that they're almost parallel with one another. They're almost the same size, because we don't have, in this case, we didn't have a center rib, and that's just the way that, that's just the way we built it. A center rib might actually be a nicer way to go here, but in any case, yeah, it looks like we also might even have a little waviness going on. Yeah, it looks like when I duplicated the edges, I wasn't being too conscious over whether or not it was a full edge that we were getting, and it looks like there's a mistake here. So be aware, pay attention to the output and make sure you got what you want. It looks like I need to make sure that there's a little fragment there that is no longer missing. Alright, so I got to go back in time a little bit and fix this. So actually, this is probably a good spot for me to pause, and I'll pick up again in just a second where I left off. Okay, so we picked it up, we fixed it. That was pretty simple. Just had to kind of get that fragment back, rejoin it, rebuild it, all the curves again, and the surface now is actually quite nice. I think if you were doing a line drawing of this, you wouldn't have a problem. You would be able to, if there's any overlapping, you'd be able to fix it. In the screenshot world or in the render world, you may have an issue where you still see that intersection peeking through. There's a little bit of a peak there of the structural part. You probably want to avoid that. It's very minor in this case. Let's see the shaded view. Yeah, you still see it. So in that case, yeah, I think in that case you have two options. One, I suppose instead of using these blue lines that we duplicated before, you would draw new new surface profiles where you can control the curvature between the elements, so that you get a little bit more of a bulge there. If that doesn't work for you, that could be depending on your project. In this case, I wouldn't do that. I think it might be a little bit harder even. What I would do in this case is just offset the surface ever so slightly so that we get a little bit of breathing room there. And I think the drawing line weights would make up for the rest. All right, it'll kind of fill that gap and it should be nice and accurate. Again, any kind of super detailed drawing that shows the connections is going to need to be redrafted anyhow. So this is really just a way for you to get a kind of a structure for that drawing going. Let's offset that surface, make sure it's going outward. It is. Solid no, distance is going to be something very small. And enter. Just hide this one. There we go. It looks like we still have a tiny little bit of overlap, so might have to offset a little bit further. That should probably do it. There you go. Not bad. Much nicer. Turn that off. Okay. Good. See if this mirrors nicely. Probably will. Yeah, it doesn't look like I have any gaps. This should be joinable. Joins nice and easy. Oh, looks like I did not have a join. Okay, so the loft may have given me a bit of a gap. So it's very, very minor in this case. We can probably just either join these edges or merge them. Let's see what happens if we merge the edges. Or is that not what I want to do? Let's see. Merge faces. Yeah. Maybe what I want to do actually is just join the edges. Let's see if that works. So it's like two edges. Yeah. So that fixed it. So sometimes you need to join the edge as opposed to joining the two, and it'll kind of work within the tolerances of the model to bring those back together. Now we have a single poly surface that's pretty clean. Okay, so non-parallel structural ribs. And then there's a couple more topics that I was going to introduce based on some questions as part of this series in the next video, and one of which is going to be how you might approximate a kind of a shrink wrap. If you have a taut say fabric that's kind of drawn over the top of ribs like this, and how it would kind of, you know, squeeze inward in between the ribs, and the ribs would kind of bulge out a little bit. Um, we have a bit of an approximation for that I'll share, and there's probably different ways to do it, but one option will be shown in the next video.